This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. To start the show is K-State row crop plant pathology specialist Rodrigo Onofre to talk about research that has been completed that looks at the impact of fertilization on sudden death syndrome severity. He also gives an update on tar spot. Sarah Lancaster, K-State weed specialist, keeps the show rolling as she discusses upcoming herbicide deadlines as well as how high temperatures could influence producers' ideal time to spray. From the latest K-State Garden Hour, Horticulture and Garden Management instructor Cynthia Domenghini discusses growing cut flowers for the home landscape or as a business opportunity. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and to start our show, we're talking about sudden death syndrome in soybeans and the effect fertilization can have on it, while also having an update on tar spot from K-State row crop plant pathology specialist Rodrigo Onofre. Rodrigo, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for the invitation.
Rodrigo, beginning our conversation today, talking about sudden death syndrome in soybeans, and what is sudden death syndrome?
We call it sudden death syndrome as a SDS, right? It's a very important disease for us here in Kansas, especially on the eastern part of the state. This disease is caused by a fungi that can persist in the soil for several years. And it's a very interesting disease because it has like a double phase where infection and colonization happens right early on in the season, right? Between that emergence to V3. But we only see symptoms on the reproductive stage around that R1, R2, 3, 4. The earlier that we see symptoms, the higher risk we are to lose our yield to the disease, right?
So something that can have a really big impact on soybean yield.
Most certainly. We have some varieties that are very susceptible and some fields that can have high levels of SDS.
So what is currently being done to manage SDS?
So SDS is a very interesting disease because all the managements that are available to our growers are pre-planting. And the most, I would say, number one is choosing a resistant variety to SDS, varieties that are high rate for resistance to this disease. And two, seed treatments. There are a few options in the market for our growers to treat their soybeans before planting, right?
Rodrigo, wanting to take a look at this research project that has looked at a few different ways to maybe manage SDS in soybeans. But before we talk about the conclusions you've seen from this research, can you set it up for us and give us some background?
Our main goal is to bring more tools to the toolbox to our growers, right? Not just variety and seed treatment, but what else can we do to manage this disease? This was very interesting work that was a collaboration with Eric A.G. in the agronomy department. So basically what we did is we fertilized the fields with NPK, plant corn, and then followed by soybeans. So over 3 years doing that same experiment, what we noticed is phosphorus had a significant impact on disease. The more phosphorus that we added, less disease, SDS severity we saw in the field.
Was there a certain level of phosphorus that was maybe ideal, or could you have too much?
The rates that we tested for phosphorus were 0, 30, and 60 pounds per acre. And what we noticed is the 60 pounds per acre was the rate that most reduced disease. 30 not so much, but 6 was significantly better than 30 and 0 pounds per acre on that application, again, done before corn planting.
Did you see any other impacts to a soybean plant with the increased use of phosphorus besides a reduction in severity of SDS?
It's a very good question. We saw higher yields with the higher rate of phosphorus as well as taller plants in those plots too.
Did nitrogen and potassium make any differences?
So the application of nitrogen and potassium, not so much for disease. We didn't see any benefit from that nitrogen and potassium application in controlling disease. Nitrogen, the relationship between nitrogen and phosphorus did increase yield. We had higher yields when we had that combination, as well as plant height. but we did not see any effect of the nitrogen, potassium, or the combination nitrogen, potassium, or phosphorus and potassium, or nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium for disease severity.
So really just a focus towards phosphorus making impact on SDS.
That's right.
You've mentioned it a few times, but wanting to point out that this is applying before you plant corn.
Yes, that's correct.
So what are some of the conclusions you've pulled from this research?
So again, like what we saw here is that higher phosphorus rates applied before corn planting had a significant impact on reducing the severity of SDS. And I think that's very important and timely for our growers because, one, we want to choose varieties that are resistant to SDS. And now growers can also add that, typical seed treatment that they would do it for fields with high levels of SDS. But now we're bringing another tool for them as well. By increasing the levels of phosphorus on those fields. Again, nitrogen and potassium did not have a significant impact for SDS, disease reduction, yield, or plant height. And the effects of phosphorus in these studies were very consistent across the years of 2014, 16, and 18, indicating, I would say, a pretty strong reliability of these results.
And is this just the stepping stone for maybe some more research into sudden death syndrome?
Most certainly. I think the next steps now is just utilizing this data and this information and trying to fine-tune phosphorus rates for targeting SDS reduction in those fields.
If people are wanting to find out more information about SDS, how can they do that?
Crop Protection Network has really good materials for SDS, as well as seed treatment efficacy and more information too. So make sure to check that out.
While you are in, Rodrigo, wanting to give an update on tar spot as we talked about it a couple weeks ago.
Yes, that's right. I think tar spot, again, it's a very important disease for corn growers here in Kansas. Last year, a lot of folks got hit, I'd say, quite hard. And again, this year, we're starting to see this disease much earlier than last season. Just a quick update. We just confirmed tar spot in 2 additional counties. So now we have in Jefferson and Nemaha, in addition to Donovan and Atchison, Kansas. So
concerned that it's going to continue to spread across the state then?
Absolutely, especially on those counties nearby where it has been reported last year or counties where we're starting to pick up here this season as well. So I'd say Brown, Potawatomi, and all those counties in the northeast, I would say we should intentionally focus our scouting there and prepare for fungicide application if needed.
And just a refresher, what are producers scouting for?
Yeah, tar spot, as the name says, right, is that tar black lesion. It's raised. You're going to see that lesion on both sides of the leaves. And it's interesting because this week I got several pictures, more like a black dot, very shiny. Looks like tar spot, but likely it's just insect bug poop, as we say. So just make sure that you're trying to scrape that lesion off, and if it doesn't rub off, it's likely tar spot. Scouting in the areas where we found it last year should be focused targeting those lower leaves up into the canop. I think that's a higher chance for us to pick that disease. The early that we find, better chance to manage and better chance to control we'll have.
Anything else you'd like to mention when it comes to tar spot, Rodrigo?
So tar spot, we can keep a track of the disease and where it has been reported. There's a very cool website called corn.ipmpipe.org where you can see all the reports and where it has been reported. So, for example, it was just reported in the southeast part of Nebraska. Iowa, we have 4 counties. Missouri, we have 3 counties. And there's several counties now in Indiana as well.
That was K-State row crop plant pathology specialist Rodrigo Onofre. I will link the resources that he mentioned in today's show notes on actday.net. Before we cut to a break, we're now going to be joined by USDA's Rod Bain and Matt Rhodes of the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service.
To help support our nation's protection efforts against entry of foreign pest and plant disease threats, USDA's Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service collects fees from commercial shippers around our nation's points of entry.
We charge user fees associated with the arrival of commercial trucks, commercial vessels, commercial aircraft, commercial rail cars, as well as international air passengers and international cruise passengers. And we also charge for the oversight of our treatments that may be required for certain cargo that's imported when pests are found, or if a treatment is required as a condition of entry for a product to come in.
Matt Rhodes is an Associate Deputy Administrator within APHIS. He says the final rule for the fee increases are now published in the Federal Register.
The new fees will be effective October 1st of 2024.
He adds all AQI user fee categories have been updated, with one exception.
We are delaying the effective date of one specific provision. We were removing an exemption for small aircraft that previously did not have to pay the fee. They will now have to pay the fee, but the effective date of that change is delayed another 6 months to April 1st, 2025.
Rhodes says the user fees play a significant part in joint efforts by APHIS and the Department of Homeland Security's Customs and Border Protection to guard against pest and plant diseases from entering our borders.
CBP has staff inspectors at over 200 U.S. ports of entry. APHIS also has a presence at ports. We have 16 different plant inspection stations strategically located around the United States to inspect imported products, to keep an eye on everything that's coming into the country and ensure that if pests are present, if we can find them through inspection, that we can mitigate them or ultimately refuse entry of imports if that's the best option we have to protect the United States.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show talking about herbicides. And to talk about it, we're joined by K-State weed specialist Sarah Lancaster. Sarah, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for the invitation, Shelby.
Sarah, talking about herbicides and specifically looking at some upcoming cutoff dates.
That's right, Shelby. Most of our listeners are probably familiar with the restrictions surrounding over-the-top dicamba applications in XtendiMax or Xtend soybeans. So basically, we're running up on those deadlines in soybeans, which is June 30th, and then cotton, which is July 30th. So we do have some deadlines coming up here. So, the important thing is for folks to think about what are you going to do for your post-emergence weed control if you're in an Xtend system, and you may or may not have that post-emergence application made before June 30th in your soybeans or July 30th in your cotton.
So as we're thinking about spraying these different things, what are some other restrictions?
Yeah, so, since this Xtend technology came on the market, we've kind of become accustomed to more restrictions for some of our herbicide applications. So one thing in particular that it's only supposed to be applied by applicators that have taken the dicamba-specific training. So the companies were offering that this winter. Another thing that is really just a good practice is to keep spray records, to keep your records. Those records are supposed to be made within 72 hours of the application, and in this case, kept for 2 years. One of the other things that's unique to both the Xtend system and the Enlist system is that there are only certain tank mix partners and only certain spray nozzles that are on label. And so now each of these herbicide labels also has an accompanying website where folks need to go and check and make sure the labels and the tank mix that they want to use are actually approved. One thing that is unique to the Xtend system is the need for both a volatility reduction agent, a VRA, and a drift reduction agent, a DRA. So 2 different products, both aimed at trying to stop different forms of off-target movement of dicamba. Other things to think about, boom height, keeping your boom 24 inches or less above the canopy. Just important, again, to prevent that off-target movement. Ground speed, the maximum labeled ground speed for an Xtend or Engenia or Tavium application is 15 miles per hour. The faster we drive, the more likely we are to get smaller droplets. Also, very specific wind speed restrictions. We know that We want to apply herbicides when there's a slight breeze, not windy. The labels here say 3 to 10 miles an hour. Another thing, and this is something we're probably going to see more of in the future, Shelby, is this statement about don't apply if a runoff producing rainfall is forecast within the next 48 hours. Be looking for that to come on a lot more labels. Other things to think about is to check something like FieldWatch. I'm not sure how many of our listeners are super familiar with FieldWatch, but it's a website where specialty crop growers can go on and kind of flag their fields so that applicators can be aware of what kind of sensitive crops are in the area. The next one on my list here is just good management, cleaning your sprayer. And then the final one, again, is something that folks are going to see more of going forward for all products, and that is the requirement to check Bulletins Live 2, which is a website that the EPA puts together to help folks know if there is an endangered species, like the whooping crane that we were talking about earlier, in the area.
What constitutes a runoff causing rain?
It's a little vague on the label, Shelby, and I think that's partly because it's going to be different for every field, right? Because every field has a different water holding capacity, and so it's a determination of how much rain is forecast and how saturated the soil already is. So it's one of the points of contention that some folks have with the way the new labels are being pulled together.
And Sarah, after these cutoff dates are all done and they're still needing to manage something in their field, what should producers maybe look at?
Yeah, so thinking about soybeans, since that's the one that's coming up first, I would think that most folks would, for pigweed control, since that's our driver weed here, I would think that most folks would be looking at some combination that includes Liberty or glufosinate as the active ingredient there, making sure that they have appropriate amounts of AMS, thinking about applying in hot, humid conditions, which I think we're going to talk about next. Other options would be the PPO inhibiting herbicides or group 14 herbicides, products like Reflex, Cobra. We know that they're not going to do a great job of controlling large pigweeds, but they can be effective when applications are made on label.
Talking about some of those conditions that people could be spraying these herbicides in, maybe a few things to watch for, and when it is hot, the plant growth process that can be impacted, which then can impact how herbicides are taken care of.
Yeah, so being a weed scientist is cool stuff, Shelby. We don't get to talk biology super often, but this is a very much a biology conversation, right? If you think about as we move into the summer, plants start adapting to survive hot, dry temperatures. So they start to develop a thicker cuticle, so that waxy layer on the outside of the leaves gets thicker, and most of our herbicide applications go on in water. And so water and oil, water and waxes don't mix, right? So that makes it harder to get herbicides into the plant. Also, it can cause more bounce or droplets to roll off the leaf. So that creates a lot of problems. And something else that happens is that the plant metabolism will actually slow down overall. Photosynthetic rate will slow down. That plant is doing everything it can to conserve water. So it closes up the stomata, the little pores on the leaf that let the oxygen in. And so then the photosynthetic process it's like you're taking your foot off the gas pedal, right? And so the photosynthetic rate has to slow down too. And the overall just metabolism of the plant starts to slow down. So that photosynthesis rate is important because most of the herbicides that we use target some facet of the photosynthetic process. That's why they're selected for plants and not people, right? So that's one of the important things. One of the caveats, though, with this whole metabolism conversation is that there's been some research that Palmer amaranth actually changes its metabolism in such a way that herbicides like Balance or isoxafludel is the active ingredient there. Those herbicides actually get metabolized or broken down faster, right? So I just spent a long time talking about how metabolic rates slow down when the plant gets hotter, but some enzymes are actually going to be upregulated and work better, making some of our herbicides, especially used in corn, not work as well.
So is there a way that maybe this can be avoided?
So some of the things that we can do to try to avoid this are to try to spray during the cooler times of the day. The catch there is that in the last few years, we've spent a lot of time talking about temperature inversions, where that layer of air gets trapped at the surface of the soil. We don't have air mixing, and so the herbicide vapors just hang. and we're not supposed to spray during that time, right? That's something that we started talking about a lot in the last few years, but it was always on the labels, was not to spray during an inversion. So trying to spray during the cooler part of the day, you've got to balance that, right? With not spraying in a time that would otherwise be off-labeled. Other things we can think about doing, Shelby, would be to increase the rates of adjuvants and surfactants. That, again, is a little bit of a double-sided coin, right? So you increase your, let's say, crop oil, for example, concentration in your herbicide application because you want to kill the weeds. Well, the crops are going to respond similarly to the weeds. So you're also likely to increase the risk of crop injury when you do that.
So is there really an ideal time to spray, or just pick your poison?
It's sort of a pick your poison sort of situation. I think, if I put myself in a farmer's shoes, I'm looking at this saying, okay, I have to get these weeds sprayed today. Spraying them today is better than spraying them 2 or 3 or 4 inches bigger in the future, right? So what can I do to offset the fact that I may not get as good of control? The other thing that's kind of important to say in this conversation, Shelby, at least for soybeans, there's a little bit of research that suggests that most of that crop injury that we see due to post-emergence herbicide applications relatively early in the season does not actually reduce yield. So hope you don't spray that field by the highway on that really hot day and get all that crop injury. But by and large, at the end of the season, it's going to be better to have sprayed when it was hot than to have not sprayed at all. Don't put off till tomorrow what you can do today.
Sarah, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thanks, Shelby.
That was Kansas State University weed specialist Sarah Lancaster. If you're looking to read more about these upcoming cutoff dates, you can find an article from the recent Agronomy eUpdate titled Cutoff Dates Approaching for XtendiMax, Engenia, and Tavium applications. If you're looking to learn more about the hot temperatures impacting herbicide applications, that article is also in the recent Agronomy eUpdate titled Herbicide Applications and High Temperatures. I will link both of these articles in today's show notes on agtoday.net. While you're there, you'll also find a link to the Chemical Weed Control Guide, which you can also find, if you want to, at www.bookstore.ksre.ksu.edu. And as always, you can sign up to receive these weekly Agronomy eUpdate articles at their website, eUpdate.agronomy.ksu.edu. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but stick around because we have more for you ahead.
From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Along with Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. For the June K-State Garden Hour, Cynthia Domenghini, a horticulture and garden management instructor in the Department of Horticulture and Natural Resources, discussed growing cut flowers for both a home landscape or as a business opportunity. That's something that she did in Kentucky before she and her family moved to Kansas last summer.
Where we had a family farm, and I decided to start a cut flower business because it sounded like a lot of fun. That was in 2019, and my goal was to be able to sell these cut flowers at the farmer's market. There was quite a demand for locally grown flowers, and that enabled me to grow my business even with all the mistakes that I made. So the gardening part of things had to be efficient. Now, since I haven't been in Kansas that long, I haven't had the opportunity to grow a lot of cut flowers here. So I reached out to a few cut flower growers in the state to get some of their advice. You can find some of them at your local farmers markets. And if you ever have the opportunity to go and chat with these growers, they love sharing their expertise. They were more than happy to share advice with me. So something that you'll want to be thinking about if you haven't started growing cut flowers is, why are you growing them? And that's an important question to ask yourself. If you're growing cut flowers for your own personal enjoyment, you may not need to focus as much on how many cut flowers you're growing or even when those flowers are going to be in bloom. You don't need to worry so much about staggering your plantings and other things that are more related to the production of cut flowers. If you're growing for landscape beautification, you might choose to grow more perennials, and that'll take a little bit more time for your garden to mature and provide you with a steady supply of cut flowers. But if it's not a business venture, then you may have that time to spend. You also might not be as concerned if you're focusing on your landscape beautification, you might not be as concerned about the stem length or the vase life, some of those things that cut flower growers for business are very concerned about. Now, if you are planning to grow your cut flower garden for an income, you'll need to plan those blooms out for each season that you want to sell your flowers. So if you are going to be part of a farmer's market that is, let's say, spring, summer, fall, and you are only growing cut flowers, you don't have any other commodities to sell, then what's your plan for making sure you have blooms in the spring and the fall? Summer's the easy one. You'll also need to do your research on what outlets you have for selling your flowers and what's already being sold so that you don't saturate the market. Growing cut flowers, obviously, as a business is going to require more strategic planning on the layout of your gardens, and that will help improve the efficiency of your management. Another detail to think about in the planning phase is what resources do you have available to support your cut flower growing goals? How much time do you have available for maintaining the gardens? This is going to help you determine what size of a garden you should have. I always recommend for gardening of any type, if you are new to gardening, start small. You can always make your garden bigger, but if you invest a lot of resources into a huge garden right off the bat and you can't maintain it, then you've got a lot of wasted time and money. Do you have a system for starting seeds? Or are you going to need to purchase transplants? And then you're going to need to find what company you want to order from. One of the ways that I decided on where to order seeds was looking on different social media groups. They will share what resources they've used, what seed companies they've used, and you can get an idea of where you would want to order your seeds from, whether it's to get more unique varieties or a better price, disease resistance. Those are all things that you want to consider. It's a lot more than just going to your local box store and buying seeds.
That's Cynthia Domenghini, a horticulture and garden management instructor in K-State's Department of Horticulture and Natural Resources. To view her full presentation, do an online search for K-State Garden Hour. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.